without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you all our lovely Dr. Claire Muselman. Hi, Claire. How are you?
Morning or afternoon for you guys. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for being here. And thank you to our sponsors. It's super fun to be back for our 2023 masterclass series. So today we are going to talk about what it means to be emotionally intelligent. This is hands down one of my newer favorite topics, especially as we look at leadership transitioning into what we look at. What we look at from a leadership standpoint, just moving forward in life and what that looks like moving forward. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm sure it's super fun at the moment, but here we go, slideshow. All right, this didn't do it. It did it again, didn't it? Annalise, what do you see?
I see a black screen.
Awesome. It's not what I would like you to see. That's what happens when I go from teaching at school to trying to do it this way. Okay, we are gonna do none of this. Still not working. Okay. Well, tech issues. Yay, 101. All right, now can we see?
I think let's share your screen one more time.
Oh. Okay, can we see now?
Yes.
Yay. All right, 18 times is a charm, right? Okay, there we go. Except now it's going to go on timer mode, and that is not what I wanted it to do. That's okay. We'll just deal with it. All right. So today we are here to have a conversation about emotional intelligence. This is actually a 9-session course about the different capacities that involve, or the different components that make up what emotional intelligence is, and really how to take some self-awareness and really taking a pause to step back and look at who we are on the inside so that we can be better at being human connectors for the best versions of ourselves in our personal lives, in our professional lives, for teams, for friends. Like, this is really taking this in a different landscape. We spend so much time in our professional worlds identifying as our professional worlds, and emotional intelligence is for all aspects of life. So we're going to dive into that this year and really encompass what that means in a plethora of different mediums. So with that, if you do not know me, my name is Dr. Claire Muselman, and I love to study human behavior. I'm a professor at Drake University. I teach leadership and self-efficacy, leadership and personal development, human capital development, pretty much anything that is business related to human capital of any kind. So it is my purpose in life to make good things happen for people. And I really want to leave the world a better place by making people feel less broken than a lot of times society depicts people to be. So I love starting out with this quote: my mission in life is not merely to survive, but to thrive, and to do so with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style. Plus, today kicks off Women's History Month. So Maya Angelou, this one is dedicated to you. So as we look at this, why do we talk about emotional intelligence? This was not a thing for a very long time. And it's kind of like how we've looked at empathic leadership models. We've started to look at compassionate leadership. We've talked about servant leadership. But why is this emotional intelligence and EQ becoming such a forefront into leadership principles? And so when we look at this from an organizational standpoint and looking at it more from your work teams and what your business operations look like, emotional intelligence plays a pretty big role, because empowered organizations encourage people. And for a long time, if we go back to like the 1920s and the Hawthorne studies, we used to think that employees were motivated by being watched. And so if you know anything about the Hawthorne studies, back in the late 1920s, there was a group that started to play with, in a manufacturing sector, they started to play with lighting. And they started to trick people into thinking that they were being watched. And so as a result, people were more productive. Well, that only gets people to work so hard. So we've seen over the past 100 years a pretty big breadth of knowledge that has expanded upon this. And now we look at what really does motivate people. What is the power of human connection? How do we look at this from a hormonal response? Because when you're actually able to formulate good, meaningful, purpose-driven human connections, your body releases oxytocin, which boosts people's meaning, well-being, feeling of belonging. It makes people feel good. So we've started to look at this because 85% of employees are disengaged. Oh, the pandemic was not good to us. And people got tired of stuff. People have really decided that we've got to look at work-life balance in a different capacity. The United States historically has a lot more mental health issues than other countries. And why do we look at things from the landscape that we do, identifying through achievement and identifying through our positions or titles or what our job affiliation is versus looking at it by the powers of human connection? In the past 12 months, 64% of employees have received zero appreciation. Yikes. When's the last time that you heard you were doing a good job? And so here's a little challenge for you guys. Tell somebody on your team today that they are doing a great job, or thank someone for helping you, because I'm sure you can find a reason to thank someone today. Organizations with engaged employees are 21% more profitable. That number has since increased. When you have people that are actually thriving in their environments, amazing to see what happens, but companies end up being more profitable. You see less sick days, you see less turnover. We know how this stuff ends up perpetuating throughout an organization space. When we look at a lack of negative feedback does not mean that people are receiving positive feedback. So just because nothing is said does not mean that that's encouraging. You still have to vocalize. Words are very powerful, and the words that we choose to use matter. So just because nothing is being said from a negative concept does not mean that that translates over to a job well done. And one of the best things that I've ever heard, and I love this, it was not related to an organization perspective, but it was, when is the best time to tell your wife you love her? And it's supposed to be before someone else does. So I like to translate that over into employees and employee engagement. When we look at when is the best time to tell your employee you appreciate them, before someone else has coached them and told them that they are amazing and fantastic. Because if you have not paid attention into our industry, this is happening at a 65% rate at this point. So things to think about when we are working with other human beings. So the definition of emotional intelligence is the ability to understand the way people feel and react, to use the skill to make good judgments, to avoid or solve problems. And I'll give you a little bit more in plain language in a second, but we're really trying to start figuring out why people feel the way that they do and how we can impact that. When we look at motivation and what drives our own personal motivation in a workplace, or what drives motivation when we try to do it from an external perspective, we really don't pay attention to the way people are feeling. We tend to speak in objective terms, looking at numbers and metrics and KPIs, which does not translate well when we're trying to increase somebody's feelings of self-worth and self-efficacy, especially in a work environment. So I want us to think about this from two landscapes. So we've looked at the emotional intelligence definition. Now we're going to look at the intelligence quotient. So we've got EQ and we've got IQ. So high IQ tends to be measured in abstract thinking, and this is how we make mental connections. Tends to be derived from standardized tests. And if I just gave you a flashback into high school or middle school where we were filling in those bubble sheets, whew, not my favorite. Standardized tests were never my jam, but this is how we chose to measure the intelligence quotient. And it really looks at this more of these abstract thinking and mental connections on how we are going to determine how intelligent someone is. So when we look at it, IQ is just a measurement of your thinking. And so it does not determine your potential for success. And it actually only ends up accounting for about 20% of success in life. And that's where we've got this other big 80% that exists. So what ends up accounting for that other 80% of our intelligence quotients? So in plain language, when we're looking at, here comes emotional intelligence. And this is our ability to recognize and understand. Here comes that power of why that I'm going to focus on here in a little bit. But your ability to recognize and understand emotions that start within, because leadership is 40% about self-leadership. How you lead yourself is going to dictate how you show up and lead others, whether it be personally, professionally, you name it. This all starts with how you look at yourself. And so we're taking understand these emotions in yourself, and then how you see them in others, because the more self-aware you become, the easier it is to understand what's going on within other people. And then you use your ability and your awareness to manage your behavior and the relationships. So this all ends up coming and being, here comes the mirror effect, all about you. And so we're going to look at emotional intelligence from that standpoint today as our introduction as to what this masterclass series is going to devolve into. So let's talk about this. And I want to open this up. I know Donna's a little bit busy, so she's not going to be super participative, and that's okay. But how do you know if someone has low EQ? Throw me out some answers. What do you see when someone has low emotional intelligence? Maybe you can think of a leader that was not your favorite, and maybe why. Or you can use entertainment. Give me some from, if anyone's ever seen Office Space, I'm sure there's some good ones there. But what do you think?
We have some comments in the chat, Claire. I don't know if you can see it.
I cannot see them. Can you read them?
So someone says yell a lot.
Oh, yeah.
The second one is passive aggressive.
Ah, yes, that one's coming up. Absolutely.
Reactionary.
Yes, absolutely.
Grouchy.
Yeah.
All right, we're all caught up.
Good. Those are
We have
good.
one more. Not good listeners.
Correct.
They listen only to respond. They don't hear you. Not compassionate.
No. So do we like working for people who have low EQ? I will tell you, those are not the people that I like to surround myself with in my personal life. So in my professional life, I like to try and avoid these people at all costs as well. Those are really great examples. Thank you, guys. All right. Emotionally intelligent traits that show if someone has low EQ. We know who these people are. They play the role of the victim. Everybody's out to get them. They avoid taking any type of responsibility because, it's everybody else's fault. And it's interesting to look at this because a lot of times when we look at leaders that play the role of the victim and avoid taking responsibility, it can perpetuate into an organization's culture where instead of looking at the grander scheme and looking at aspects that might make you have a better competitive advantage for your organization, they end up saying, well, it's a bad marketplace, or, we had COVID, or they'll find every reason that they should be a victim from that organization standpoint and avoid taking responsibility of, hey, you know what, we made a couple bad decisions. We failed to pivot at the appropriate time. We need to reassess, regroup, et cetera. So you'll see these leaders, and then sometimes it perpetuates into an organization's culture and how they show up in the marketplace and how they try to sustain competitive advantage. So some things to think about when you're looking at organizations that you enjoy working for, business partnerships that you want to add in as your strategic partners in life, looking at what kind of emotional intelligent traits that exist, not only with their leadership, but what that looks like from an organizational culture standpoint. We covered this. You guys identified this earlier: passive or aggressive communication styles. Oh, come on. Just say what you mean and mean what you say. I like to use this as the I in team. So if you have not seen this meme, it is, there is no I in team. And then there's the joke that says it is hidden in the A hole. So we'll leave that there. These people are not good team players. They're out for themselves. And of course, they are going to blame the people that are on their team. They tend to be overly critical of others and dismiss others' opinions. So when we're talking about the listening elements are very important on this. Looking at active and reflective listening, this is not prevalent with someone with low emotional intelligence. Then they challenge managing their relationships. It's really hard to be able to try and build some type of camaraderie with these people. They tend to lack empathy. And as you guys identified, they are reactionary. We are not proactive in this space. So, okay, that was the little, getting some baseline here. So then what are emotionally intelligent traits that show a high EQ? And Annalise, if you will be my Vanna on this, I would sincerely appreciate it. What do we got? Good listener, empathetic, vulnerable, truly listen. I like that. Good. Cindy, I want you to expand on this. What does vulnerable mean? Got to define these terms too. What do you guys think? Respectful, relatable. Very good. All right. Keep on moving. All right. So people with IEQ, guess what? They make better decisions. Pretty fascinating, right? They are problem solvers. So you bring somebody an issue and they are going to find a solution to it. There's no blame game here. There is no trying to throw fault. There is just, all right, this is what happened. Let's take it and let's go find a solution. They keep cool under pressure. All right. The time might be ticking and the deadlines might be coming quickly, but these guys are good at keeping cool under pressure. They are also not afraid to address conflicts. And that's something when we talk about, I always love when HR is like, we're going to take time today to talk about crucial conversations. These guys are just good at it because they address conflicts as they arrive. They don't make them personal, and we stick to the facts again, because the whole goal here is to have a solution-focused mindset. And so they tend to be those people that are highly sought after because they are able to communicate in a way that makes people feel seen, heard, acknowledged, and valued. And also that you're getting the team as a whole to move the objectives forward by focusing on those solutions and that vision of where you're headed. They tend to have greater empathy. And they also listen, reflect, and respond to constructive criticism. So this is where emotionally intelligent people and emotionally intelligent leaders aren't afraid to have people tell them what they think or how they're being perceived. This ends up helping people be more relatable and also to depersonalize things. So not everything is a personal attack, but it's more, hey, I noticed this. And they're able to take that constructive feedback, whether it be to adjust maybe how they're being perceived or to try and change an enhancement. I'll give you guys a good example of this. I had a student, so I teach a decent amount of business courses at Drake University, and I like to use movies to depict some of the themes that we're trying to articulate. Well, a lot, since this is Women's History Month, a lot of the movies that I have chosen in my life have tended to be very male-based. And so I had a student come up to me at the end of class last week, and she's like, hey, like the movies, but do you have any that could have a strong female lead in them? And I said, oh my goodness, thank you for that awareness, because I am a female leader. I am a female professor. I should be able to start showing up better with media that replicates exactly what we are trying to depict moving forward. So some interesting constructive criticism that was really well timed and very well appreciated. So when we start looking at that, like, it's not a personal attack by any means, but sometimes people are giving you feedback because they want to help you stand for what you believe in too. And so they're going to give you feedback that's going to help you from your perception, from what your goals are and what you're trying to achieve. So some things to think about relating to that. So emotional intelligence, we talked about the intelligence quotient being very much about how your brain is kind of wired, and that we're looking at it very specifically from an intelligence perspective, but it doesn't indicate how successful you will be. Emotional intelligence is a major indicator of your achievement. It's going to look at your personal achievements, your relationships, how well you're doing in those, whether it be friendship, whether it be romantic relationships, your professional life. EQ is a major indicator of this. It also shows how stable you are, and is a big reflector of your personal contentment and how fulfilled you feel in your daily life. So when you are able to flex that emotional intelligence, you can end up being happier and having a better, more productive, fulfilling life, the more that you start paying attention to that. So when we look at strengthening our EQ muscle, we're going straight to the brain. Love this. So if you have not had any water lately, our brains love to stay hydrated. Make sure you take some water in while we are going through this. So the good thing about emotional intelligence is that this is not hardwired. We can develop this, and we can strengthen our emotional intelligence muscles. So this is where people feel before they act. The way that our brains are designed, we feel things before we speak, before we act. Now, what kind of a pause exists, what kind of processing exists, that's where we get to start exercising some self-regulation. If you guys have not seen this, Simon Sinek has a wonderful TED Talk. I think it's back from 2009. So, oh my gosh, forever ago, but also really good stuff. It's called the golden circle. And he talks about how leaders communicate and why it's so effective and what it does. And it all ends up being stemmed around how our brain is actually designed. And I love this because it's one of the reasons that I started changing how I spoke to my teams probably from 2013 on. So when we look at how our brain is designed, we have the very frontal region that is our neocortex, or what's called the Homo sapien brain. And this is where all of our rational, analytical, and language is kept. Then when we look at the middle subsections of our brain, those are called our limbic brains. And this is where human behavior and decision-making reside. This is where we feel those feelings. So as we just talked about back here, people tend to feel before they act. Well, if you're looking at how the brain is designed, that makes sense. You're starting here with those middle sections of the limbic brain. And that is where we're having those feelings. This is where you've got the feelings of trust, where you get to feel those feelings of loyalty. And a lot of times where people say, well, I have a gut feeling, that's all stemming from your limbic brain. There is no capacity for language in the limbic brain, but this is where decision-making takes place. So let's think about that for a second. This means when we are communicating to people, and this is why emotionally intelligent people are much better at getting solution focused and getting buy-in from their teams. It all starts about how you communicate. So people can understand these crazy amounts of information coming at them when we speak in facts and figures and numbers and data and features and benefits and all these analyses and analytics and data, and we push all of this at people. It comes, but it's got to process through that Homo sapien brain. But while we can process and we can understand all this information that people are going to throw at us, that's not what's going to drive human behavior. And so it's interesting when we start looking at this, we tend to speak so objectively and we try to tell everyone that objectivity is so incredibly important. But interestingly enough, that's not that does not drive behavior. So when we start looking at this from a communication standpoint and we're trying to figure out how to be the most effective and the most communicative, for the biggest impact, we've got to start communicating from that limbic brain and going out. And that is where emotionally intelligent leaders tend to be better. They start with the why we're going to do something. Instead of figuring out who to blame, they're like, okay, what is the situation that occurred and how do we fix this? Why did this situation occur? How do we move this forward? And they speak with why to how to what. And that is the way that the brain ends up being able to process more effectively. And it's how you help drive behavior through decision-making. So people can rationalize with things said, but it's not necessarily what we do. So again, how you're speaking at people. When we speak at people with numbers, figures, and objectivity, we tend to speak what, how, and then get into the why. But again, that's not what's going to be able to drive human behavior. If you can start getting people to understand the why first, and then into the how, and then talking about the what, and we work inside out, this is how it's more effective for people to be able to drive human behavior changes and transformations. If you read anything on change management, this is going to also be a big factor because this is how you get people to effectively buy in to change that's going to come. People are innately resistant to change. We like to do things the way we've always done. Welcome to the system and the industry that we're currently in. But this is where we start to change the game. We want to change the narrative, and we always have to start with communicating with the why. This automatically gets people into that feeling group. And this is where people can then start to rationalize and understand the feelings that are associated with the context and the data that's going to come next. Facts and figures don't end up equal gut decisions. This is why when people can throw as much data as they want at you, and you can still sit there and be like, it just doesn't feel right. I don't like this decision. Or you go back and we think about our intuition, or I pretend I have like this little cheerleader inside my body that's like, yeah, I don't like that. There's just something about that that doesn't sit right. That's your limbic brain telling you, hey, decision making, this doesn't feel right. There's something that is off about that. And so this is when we're looking at that communication models. This is why we have to start with the why, get those feelings to be understood, and then how we effectively communicate going out. Decision making doesn't reside in that frontal cortex where language is processed. And so when people say, I tend to lead with my heart or my soul, or I'm a servant leader, a lot of times that's coming from leadership skills that are focused more on feelings versus your stereotypical, I'm going to lead based on metrics, key performance indicators, etc. But again, using the why and focusing on our limbic brain is much more effective to getting human behavior to change and to get those decision-making components versus speaking at people through numbers and figures. And so this is when we start looking at who is emotionally intelligent, we are working with people who are taking that information in that we have received and processing, listening before they render an opinion, or they start to look at solution focused, we're starting to look at more of those feelings. And this is why emotional intelligence is so imperative when we're starting to look at behavior or whatnot. So what ways, why do we need to strengthen emotional intelligence? Claire, we've always done things like this, or we've always done it this way. Leadership is what leadership is. We can improve things in small amounts. Well, when you start to strengthen your emotional intelligence muscle, you get to be much better at managing your reactions. So this ends up shifting us from a reactionary standpoint, which is considered a low emotional intelligence trait, and shifts it into being a proactive, high emotional intelligence trait. And so you get to be able to manage the way that you are perceived and how you are going to show up by strengthening your emotional intelligence. And guess what? It makes you happier. Amazing. We all want to be happier. We want to feel joy every day. So again, focusing on this EQ ends up helping us do that. You get to then manage you. Here comes self-leadership, my favorite topic right now. Figuring out how to be the best manager of you is one of the greatest skill sets that you can have. Becoming more self-aware, becoming more self-regulated and more accountable to yourself is not only beneficial for you and the life that you live, but it's also beneficial to the quality of the relationships that you have and the people with whom you interact. And then you get to effectively manage your relationships as a result, which makes everyone that gets to be around you a lot happier, and your energy ends up being very different than what it would be if you were someone with low emotional intelligence. So this is where we start going into the components of emotional intelligence. Here we go, EQ. So the components that make up EQ include self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. These are all elements of self-leadership. And again, I want to go back to when we look at leadership on a spectrum, about 40% of leadership in general, those traits and what's important, all are about regulating yourself. And that ends up being one of the most important factors in how you lead yourself, because how well you understand who you are at your core, how well you understand how you respond and you react and what you stand for, your values, your mission in life, your purpose, and your vision. The better you are at understanding that in yourself, the better you are to help other people see it within themselves, and the better you are at articulating where you're headed in an organization or with a team. And in order to be able to do that, the more self-awareness that you cultivate within, the better you are at leading other people. And this is where if you can make yourself happier and start really showing up for yourself and being accountable on a lot of those elements, just think about what can happen as a result. So this is where we're going to get into some fun topics this year. So there's personal competence, and then we're going to look at relational competence. So when we look at personal competence, this is where we're going to really make this personal about ourselves. What you see within yourself is all about self-awareness. And this is one of the components that goes into emotional intelligence. You've got to be aware of how you respond. What makes you tick? What sets your soul on fire? What makes you get up in the morning and want to go seize the day? We do not do enough self-reflection as an individual, as a collective, as a society. We need to figure out what we want in life. So many times this is determined by what our parents wanted for us, or what our grandparents wanted for us, or I think I should do this because society says this, or entertainment says that women should act this way and men should act this way, and we should be doing things in this capacity. But what do you really want for yourself? And what does that look like? So we're going to dive deeply into self-awareness and figuring out, what does it mean? Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? What does that look like? How do you end up figuring out where you get your energy from? When is the best time for you to be creative? What is the best time for you to work out? What other elements exist? What characteristics are your fortes, and where do you want to work? What elements do you want to work on for yourself? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses or opportunity areas, depending on how you want to use that from a verbiage standpoint? And we're going to really dig into, why do we self-sabotage? Because a lot of the times we are our own worst enemy in setting ourselves up for success. And then if we want to continue to flex that emotional intelligence muscle and be better at it, we've got to figure out ways to start regulating ourselves first, so that we can then showcase a lead by example mentality and also identify these areas within other people. So then this is our self-awareness, what I see. Then we've got to translate that into action items and implementation into your daily life. And this is where we start looking at things from a self-management aspect. So there are a plethora of things that we're going to cover this year, but a lot of them are going to be little daily routine habits that we start to make effective changes in your life. Because what we're going to do is try to start rewiring the neural pathways in your brain and trying to get you to see yourself in a different light. So a couple things that we're going to cover, and I believe this is an article that has been posted on Bloom. We're going to look at, how do you talk to yourself? The words that you use when you are referencing yourself, or you're talking to yourself when you're having your own personal dialogue, these words matter, and your brain is listening. Your body is listening. Your cellular structure is listening every time you talk. So would you talk to yourself the way that you talk to your best friend, or maybe your daughter or your son or your spouse or your partner? What does that look like? What words do you choose to use to describe yourself, either to other people or, again, within that own self-talk? We've got to figure out how to start managing that in a way that is going to be the most beneficial for you, so that you can become that most beautiful light possible and going out there and living with your ultimate passion and purpose. So then we want to look at this from a social competence standpoint. So what I see from a social awareness standpoint, one of the bigger factors in this is, where do you get your energy from? A lot of times we see extroverts that are out there being incredibly social, and we're like, wow, they're really out there, and they really might be introverts. We've got to look at, what does that mean from those components? And if this is where I'm getting my energy from, how much energy am I giving off? Is this positive energy? Is it negative? What am I receiving? And so we want to look at it from that standpoint, from a social awareness, as well as, how am I being perceived? How do people see me? Do I walk into a room? When you enter a room, are you walking in that room with presence? And I mean, like, walking into that room, looking around, maybe finding the people that you're looking for when you enter a room, or are you on your phone? What does your shoulder structure look like? Are your legs crossed when you're just standing there, or do you keep your legs about shoulder width apart? These are things that can actually shift your energy and creates a different type of energy when you are coming into social situations. How do you choose to captivate an audience? What does that look like? When is the last time that you've had a conversation with someone in person and you remembered their eye color? There's a few things that we'll talk about from the social awareness standpoint as well, but a lot of things that are going to be fun that we cover this year. And then relationship management. I don't know about you guys, but relationships are hard, because humans are complex people. We all have a plethora of things going on in our lives, and we tend to take things really personally when it really might not have anything to do with you. So we want to look at our social competence scale, because when we take into account our social competence with our personal competence, this is what drives the effective components of emotional intelligence as a whole. So we are going to end up covering self-awareness in a pretty big light. Self-awareness is a superpower. It is also an interesting curse. And I say that because the more self-aware you become, you can't unknow what you know. So the more that you learn about yourself, and the more that you are able to start regulating and being more of a self-manager and really starting to take these self-leadership components, the more you see what other people don't. So when we have, as we've talked today, we've talked about these high emotional intelligence traits. We're able to identify those with low emotional intelligence traits as well. And so the more time that we spend studying ourselves and cultivating awareness within, we are then able to see those people who choose to not be self-aware. And so this does end up shifting some of our relationships, our interpersonal relationships, who we choose to spend time with, the circles and the company that we choose to keep. Because again, this is a superpower. And also for people that just don't want to do the work, it starts to become pretty evident. When we become more socially aware, or when we're looking at this from like a self-awareness standpoint, we become more socially aware as well. And so it ends up helping us understand why people behave the way that they do. And it helps us figure out what's an effective way to find solutions in working with these people. So from a self-awareness standpoint, this helps us accurately monitor and perceive our own emotions. Why is this triggering for me? Why do I feel this way about that? Remember, going back to our limbic brain and looking at that center for feelings, we want to be able to monitor our own physiological signs. So if someone comes up and says, I didn't appreciate your presentation or didn't like it or whatnot, I felt like you were very emotional. What do you do from a physiological standpoint? It's not like jump across that table and be like, I'm not being emotional. We will talk through that. And what are physiological signs? How do you identify that in your body? The more self-aware you become, the more you're able to start feeling some of these physiological signs when you're interacting with other people. This is your body's response to energy. And the more self-aware you become, the more able you are to be able to be proactive in how you are being perceived, the emotions that you're going to put forth, and how to make sure that you don't get emotionally hijacked in specific situations so that you can stay productive, keep blooming, and keep moving forward. Then we've got to be aware of our emotions as they happen. We have been dealt a beautiful card of items, very colorful couple of years here. And, that's just kind of the way life is. So how do we take that and really embrace those emotions and know that it's okay to feel, and figuring out, what is this teaching me? Why is this happening for me? And start to look at things from a different landscape. Again, we're looking at words being very powerful. And so what does this look like as we continue to move forward? And then we really, when we're looking at this and this self-awareness, what is it about certain people that make us react in specific manners? So this is where we start to be aware of how we tend to respond to specific situations and specific people. And are we okay with those responses? Or are they responses that we actually need to start taking a little bit more self-awareness on and trying to shift or shape ourselves to respond differently? I'm diving into the why. Why does this feel this way? What does this look like? And even more beautifully, this gives us the opportunity to see who we really are. So many times we identify ourselves with our position or our organization or what our academic status is, maybe what year we are in school, how we fall in line in a family. And we never really get to identify who we are as a person by just peeling away all those onion layers. And the self-awareness components that we're going to discuss this year are really going to try and do that. So you know who you are at your core before the world told you who you should be. So how would you define self-awareness? I'm curious. Let's just get some ideas flowing today. Are there places or times where self-awareness is especially sharp or dull? Do you feel like you could be more self-aware? And has self-awareness changed you as you've matured? Or do you feel like you've got some growth that you can do? Some things to think about as we continue moving forward with this. Once you become very self-aware, this is where you start to see those emotional intelligence muscles flex, because we're super strong, and you will start to see an increase in your own self-confidence, have a realistic assessment of who you are and where you're going, and if that is the path that you want to stay on. It might not be, but this is your journey. This is your life, and you get to decide how to live it. So then we can take our own talents and treasures and do what we want to truly be excited about the life that we are living. Then we're going to look at self-management, another component of this. And this is where we start to recognize and understand our moods, emotions, our drives, and our motivation. Do you know what motivates you? Like, what is that factor that gets you out of bed in the morning? What does it mean to take on the day and feel inspired about the life that you're living? Did you know that you can actually control your mood? Don't believe me? We will touch on this during self-management, and we'll do some exercises throughout that course. But you can choose your mood. Your mood ends up setting a tone for the overarching moment of the day. Emotions come and go that are situational, but a mood is something that we have a direct influence over. Don't believe me? Go try and stare at yourself in the mirror and just smile. Smile for a few seconds and truly look at yourself. You can increase your mood by simply staring at yourself in the mirror and smiling. And now if you're watching yourself on Zoom, try this out. Just start smiling. Hopefully it'll boost your mood within this. Now, science says it's a 3 to 7 minute time period, so maybe it won't take you that long. But if you want to go stare at yourself in the mirror for 3 to 7 minutes, you'll have to let me know how it goes for you. We're also going to look at how your mood then impacts others. I can tell you that I know I get in a grumpy mood when I get stressed out, and that totally impacts the relationship I have with my daughter. Even though it has nothing to do with her, it has everything to do with me. And what do I need to do to regulate that, to not impact those relationships in a negative manner? How do I shape shift my mood so that it's in a more positive light? How do I improve my mood as it exists? And this is where we start looking at the ability to control or redirect our destructive impulses or moods. And this is where we're going to look at self-sabotage. I'm going to give you guys a quiz, and I will tell you the self-sabotage quiz, the very first time I ever looked at it, I read question 1 and shut my laptop. I was like, nope, not doing this one today, because we are our own worst enemy, and we end up being the thing that stands in our way of our happiness, our success, and what our future holds. Sometimes we just have to figure out how to show up for ourselves. And that's where self-management is going to come really into placating how we use this as a forte to flex our emotional intelligence and our self-leadership skills. Self-management also gives us that ability to suspend judgment, and also gives us that ability to think before we act or we react. As we look at moving into social awareness again, we talked about this a little bit. I want you guys to think about it in the landscape of how we interact with other people. And this is where we also take the time to observe, but not just observe, understand what other people are feeling or experiencing. And this ends up really helping kind of I don't want to say de-demonize, but it makes us really look at people more as people versus, that terrible leader I had way back when, or this person that I have to work with that I don't really appreciate. I don't like that person's tone. They're very direct with me. This helps us accurately understand why people behave the way that they do, and gives us a different lens so that we can put them on a more personal aspect or a more human aspect. And it makes them easier to want to interact with and to work with, again, to find solutions so that we can move forward. So this is where we start to look at empathy in a social awareness context. And that's the ability to see the world from somebody else's point of view, and then be able to identify and understand somebody else's situations, feelings, motives, maybe what's going on in their life, being able to practice empathy, but also maintaining accountability throughout this process. So when we look at social awareness, some of the things that we're going to want to think about: can you accurately pick up on emotions in other people? I mean, sure, maybe with some of our personal relationships, but what about your average person? Can you start paying attention to body language? Do you start to see somebody's facial reactions and understand maybe more of what they're thinking than they even realize, purely from paying more attention to their social cues and their physiological responses? Can you pay attention when somebody's starting to get irritated, annoyed, maybe bored, sad, unhappy, distracted? Can you read the room and tell when people are getting distracted? Or is this a great time to have a conversation like this? What does that look like? And we're going to dive into this. And this ends up really placating into the whole components of empathy and organizational awareness, and really focusing on more of a service orientation, which is great from a leadership standpoint. One other thing we're going to cover is relationship management. And this is the fourth quotient when we're looking at emotional intelligence as a whole. And relationship management is important. It's the ability to use your awareness of your emotions and the emotions of others to successfully manage your interactions. So if we know somebody's had a hard day, are we going to go drive and say, you know what, actually, I've been really wanting to talk to you about something? This is where we have to really pay attention to our relationships. Is somebody truly asking for your advice? Do they just want to be heard? So many times people just want to be heard and validated, and we tend to offer our own opinion into a situation when that's not what someone needs. And so are we able to assess that from a relationship management standpoint? And are you able to find common ground to build connections with others? The power of human connection is so imperative these days. And if COVID didn't teach us anything, or the pandemic, we need that power of human connection. It's the difference between isolation and solitude that we'll cover with self-management. And this is something that ends up really playing into the relationship management aspect of life. Also looking at it from an introvert extrovert standpoint and figuring out how to regulate yourself even better. In order, when we're looking at relationship management, we want to ensure clear communication. So this is where we go back to looking at that limbic brain to our Homo sapien brain, or the neurocortex. And we look at how do we communicate with people to derive effective communication? Are we speaking into that, the why, the how, the what? Are we coming to people at a time where they are receptive to information? Or is there a better time to be able to do this? And this ends up helping us being able to more effectively manage conflict. And this will help us lead more effectively through change management, being more persuasive and helping serve people to the highest good that we can. Remember, human beings are complicated. Human beings, we all are juggling multiple balls at once. We all have multiple things going on. And so while we might be physically here right now, we might be thinking about 7 other items that have to get done today, or what's going to be for dinner, who's picking up the children. I have a deadline. What does this stuff look like? And so when we start to give people a little bit more grace and understand that human beings are multifaceted, multifunctional, multidimensional, multi-emotional people, we can better understand how to meet them where they're at by flexing our emotional intelligence and starting to become more self-aware. Again, starting with ourselves first, so that we can better manage our social capital and relationships. So when we look at this, the best part of all of this is all of these elements can be improved. And all we need to do is take an awareness inventory check to be able to start there and move forward. We start by doing this by focusing on one EQ skill at a time. So we just talked about 4 components that we're going to be looking at. This is how we're going to end up moving that. And then we're going to start by identifying 3 strategies that will help us improve this. And so we're going to take this time over the next 9 months of really focusing on tweaking just little things throughout your day-to-day. The power within self-improvement comes from consistency. It's not about trying to do 800 things at once, but it's about very small changes that are done day after day. And we start to flex our consistency muscles to be able to think about how we speak to ourselves. And when I'm brushing your teeth, what do you say to yourself in the mirror? When you see your reflection, how are you talking to yourself? What are the words that you use when you're trying to pump yourself up? Or if something doesn't go well, what are the words that you use to describe yourself? Or how do you talk to yourself? And then we're going to find an accountability buddy so that we can make sure that we're holding each other accountable. So as we go through this process, there's a couple of things I want you guys to be aware of and to think about first. Keep in mind that we are looking for progress over time and not perfection. We are going to practice and practice and practice. I'm going to give you guys a plethora of items to use to try and boost your own emotional intelligence and your self-leadership. I know not everything is going to work for you. Sometimes you'll think, no, that is not going to be my jam, but you are going to find things that will work for you. So take what you like and leave what you don't. And that's completely okay. Remember to be patient and to give yourself some grace and to be kind to yourself and measure your progress. And if you do not already have one, grab a journal, because journals, I'm not telling you to sit out and write, because a lot of people don't like journaling, I'm learning. But journals, think back to when you were in high school or maybe when you were in college and you would take notes on lectures. Well, your life is your lecture. So take notes about what you observe about yourself throughout the day. You can take notes on your phone. You could just take a small journal around with you, but start paying attention to what's going on in the world around you. And we start to focus more on this self-awareness and these self-accountability measurements. This is where we're going to start to really be able to improve our own quality of life by recognizing what we're feeling, what we're seeing, and how we want to show up better for ourselves. So if you are a leader, I want you to think about how this plays into your whole organization's culture. Are you currently working in a system or on a system? Are you managing stuff at work? When you look at your own life, are you managing stuff, or are you managing the behaviors that go into this? Are you able to coach people or manage people? Are we pushing metrics? Are we looking at human behavior? And I want you to think about that, not only within your organizations, but I want you to think about that in your own life. Are you managing your own life, Or are you coaching yourself how to be better within your own system of life and what that looks like? Remember, there's the two most important leadership attributes are understanding human behavior. You got to start with your own before you start looking at your teams. And then looking at it from our communication standpoint. How are you communicating? Think back to the way that our brain is actually designed and start showing up and doing yourself a favor through the communication components. Really quickly, some easy heavy hitters. How do you keep your team warm? We start asking people how they really are doing. And so when we're talking about this and using emotional intelligence for these type of components, these are easy wins. So we get invested into our relationships. We care about the people with whom we're spending our time. We look at our own expectations. One of the things that I actually got from one of my students from our self-leadership class was that every week they make a to-do list and then they break it out into sticky notes day by day. So what are your expectations for the week? And then how do you break that out day to day? And then how do you show up for yourself to make sure you're crossing those off? And so we're trying all of these different habits to see what's going to work for each of us, because what works for me may not work for you, but I'm still going to give you every tool and resource possible to try and emphasize the importance of doing these things and the components that make up for you to have a really beautiful blooming life. Then we've got to look at appreciation. We've got to show ourselves appreciation for showing up for ourselves so that we can replicate this. Remember, consistency, but then also making sure that we're giving acknowledgement and we are holding people accountable, but you've got to start by holding yourself accountable first. And you know what? We are in this. This is our 2023 masterclass series. We are in this together. So I'm here for you. Always happy to talk offline as well. We will cover some more about language. We're going to cover a lot about words and language and what that is showing for us. And so kind of talking about past, present, future. We're going to talk about the descripting words that we use, how we choose to describe ourselves from a physical standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from a mental standpoint, power of tense, the power of words. We're also going to talk about other elements of communication when we are working with groups and teams, how to publicly praise, but privately critique, not criticize, but critique. Looking at ways to verify information that we've received, how to use like the I am, I think, I feel, I believe statements. I want, you want, we want, so that you're effectively driving communication through the right verbiage to focus on the right parts of the brain to drive that human behavior forward. And again, a lot of this starts with how we talk to ourselves. We're going to talk about how to ask the right questions and why that matters, and how we show up for ourselves and how we show up for our teams by being authentic and demonstrating that we truly care about the people we are spending our time with, and how we're investing into our teams so that they can buy into what we're doing from an organizational objective standpoint, taking our mission, vision, and values and cultivating that into purpose-driven momentum to drive our industries forward. And then we're going to look at choices and our specific choices of what that looks like and how we use choices as powerful tools of one good choice after another good choice after another. Steve Jobs is going to come in on this component as well. And then we want to really verify when we're working with our teams, because there's going to be a big team component to this, is where on earth are we going? We're going to look at our mission and our vision and the core values and how we choose to get our objectives across from our personal lives, and then we're going to translate it into an organization. This is business strategy as a whole, but I want you guys to look at it more from your team standpoint. And so many times we miss these elements of how an individual contributor really placates into the team and the organization as a whole, focusing on meaning and purpose and what's expected. Are we aligned? Does my personal mission statement in life relate to my organization's? Or should I be looking for something that's going to make me more satisfied within my life? What value? Where's my self-worth? How am I identifying my self-worth, and what value do I bring, one, to this organization and the team and the relationships that I'm choosing to participate in? And then we're going to focus heavily on building trust, transparency, and rapport. We are going to leave this class so emotionally intelligent with our muscles flexed on building these components out. We're going to learn to be more intentional. We're going to talk about the eye color. When's the last time that you sat across from somebody having coffee and you remember their eye color? Now, please don't go stare at people blankly for the rest of the day, but things to think about as we start to ground some rules of engagement with intentionality. And we're going to talk about living our life at a level 10, because this is all about self-leadership too. And your emotional intelligence ends up being the quality of life that you have. So we'll cover this and really focus on what sets your soul on fire, what breaks your heart, where do you get your energy from, where does your passion and purpose reside, and what depletes you? Who are the people? What are the situations? What are the scenarios? We'll figure out how you can be living at a level 10 life. And I will give you further resources after every masterclass. So we've got 3 books that if you want to check out on Blinkist, if you want to read these or check these out on Audible, these are some of the habit groups that we have been referencing. Next masterclass, we're going to do some emotionally intelligent quizzes on figuring out where do you reside on some of these spectrums, so that you can have a very cultivated awareness to be able to start here, start now, and just begin as we move forward. So I look forward to you guys joining me on this amazing journey.